Welcome back. In this presentation, we're going to create an application where the application will copy one text file to another. Before you do that, make sure that you understand how to do it with somebody else's utility. Your operating system comes with a copy command. Make sure you type in / to pull up the help file. You can see that the help file will show you that the source and destination is required for the copy to be performed, and here you can see some definitions. Here now I'm using the copy utility. Con is a console, space a.text is the destination. So everything that we type on the console will be saved on a.text file. When you're done, press Ctrl Z to save the file. To see the contents of the file, type in type space a.text in order to see the contents. And then so you can now copy one file to another file. So first, practice copying files from the command line. Then think about the concept. How do we copy files from a source to a destination? So we have a file name and the file extension. What the file name and file extension is, it doesn't matter, long as you have text as a contents inside the file. Now, text files contains characters, and the end of the file is marked with the EOF. So every line of the text file is terminated by the carriage return, the new line character, and every line of text can contain multiple words. So before you're thinking about how do you copy one file to the next, you need to understand these basic concepts. And we need to give a file name to the destination, and that file also gonna have an end of the file marker. So when you're thinking about applications always gonna be utility name space from space to. So we have the from and to files. Sometimes they also refer to as source and destination. But mainly you're gonna see them as from and to. So what we do in this case, we can use the copy command and try to copy a.text to b.text file. We can also specify the path in front of the source and destination files. So path/a.text space path/b.text would be the destination. So copy ctemp a.text is the source, ctemp b.text is the destination. So if we copy a file that does not exist, we get an error message, and we can echo the error level, that's 1. It means something went wrong. We can also try to copy to a location that we don't have access to, like in this case the root of Z, and that's going to be a denied. Error level is 1. Something went wrong. When you copy something from a folder or directory that doesn't exist, again it's an error message. Error level is 1. When we try to copy something to a destination path that doesn't exist, error level 1 again. So in this chapter we talk about a few classes to figure out how to read and how to write to files, and what is an exception. So those kind of concepts are very important, but before we even thinking about writing the application, we need to plan our logic. So in this case, in the UML, I'm creating the class myCopy, and myCopy only gonna have the main method. Now the method logic gonna be a flowchart, and in this case we're just gonna declare an input file, and the input file gonna have a specific source text file, which is a.text, including the path, and then we also have the output file where we have b.text. Now when we using the input file, we need to make sure that the input file actually exists. If it doesn't exist, we should not continue with the program. We also making sure that the output file doesn't exist, because if it does, we don't want to overwrite it. And at that point we can thinking about maybe we need to look at the end of the file marker within the file to stop our copying process. So in this case, we are reading one line at a time from the input file, and we're writing it to the output file until the input file's end of file marker was reached. So we just connect, make sure that you have the proper arrows and lines, and eventually we start reading. And if the arrows don't bend the right way, you can just right click and add a segment and remove a segment what you don't need, and that way you can adjust the arrows. So here in this case we are using DIA, which is a free application that makes this whole process of planning much easier. Okay, so when we reach the end of the file, we just need to remember to close the input file and the output file, and this is pretty much all the logic that we need for this application. So make sure that you adjust all your shapes to make it look nice and more professional, and we're pretty much done with the logic. Okay, so add the error message. Remember when we used just the copy command, when the input file did not exist, it gave us an error message. So when it gave us an error message, it also gave back to the operating system a code. So in this case, if the input file does not exist, we're going to return to the operating system 2017. That's the end of the application. There is no reason for us to continue. Now the output file, we want to protect the output file, because the way that we know how to open a file right now, we cannot protect the file. So if the file name already exists, we want to stop the program. So in this case, we're going to display an error message that the output file does exist. So we're going to return an error message or error code 2018. And then make sure that you put the proper labels on your logical statements, so you can follow the actual logic. Okay, so while the loop is through, and then when we reach the input file's end of the file marker, then we need to quit, and at that point we close input and output files. Okay, so make sure that you make the logic or the plan very nice. At that point we are ready to start coding. Okay, so start a new project, and we are ready to create our class. At that point you don't have to think about anything. You just write in the description what is it that we want to do. Well, we want to copy text file, right, source to destination. Take ownership of your code with the author and make sure that you have the version. Okay, so in order to get an input, we usually use scanner, and before we used the input stream, but now we're going to use file. So make sure that you look at file. Where is file? File is in java.io, and the file can take a string in its constructor. So that's what we're going to be using. So instead of the input stream, we're using file as the input, and that's how we're going to redirect from reading from keyboard to from an actual file. And in this case, just for the file constructor, I just copied and pasted the description of the file constructor as my own comment in my code. Okay. And then of course you need to look at the scanner, that the scanner can also be instantiated with a file. And again, I can just take the description of the scanner constructor. So you can see that the file is not in java.lang, so we need to use a absolute path to java.io when we refer to the file class. So scanner, again, it's not in java.lang, so we need to use the absolute path. So now we have a way to read from a file. But what is this error message? When we had the input stream, we did not have to deal with anything else but creating the input stream. But now, because the scanner instantiation is using a file, and the file constructor, file-based constructor throws an exception, we need to handle that exception. But now, who handles the exception? Now, this is where we create the main method, and then we're going to say that the main method will throw the error or the exception. Okay? So we need to tell that, and since the exception is also in I/O, we have to use the absolute path, so we can create the object. Okay. So we talked about the print writer. So the print writer is a class that can also take a file object in its constructor, and that constructor also throws the same exception just like the scanner did. So since we are throwing that from the main method, we don't have to do anything else when we create the print writer. Now, print writer is also in java.io, so we need to use the absolute path. Okay, and we have a basic application with input and output file handlers. Okay. We also have something called a file writer, and the file writer you might use because if you look at the documentation, the file writer can take a file, but it also has a second parameter that can specify if we want to append to an existing file. So with the print writer, if the file doesn't exist, then we're gonna create it. If the file exists, we're gonna overwrite it. With the file writer, we can specify that it might append, and if we're appending to a file, now we're using a different class, so we don't overwrite the contents of the existing file, but we're appending text to the end of the file. And we just have to say true, which is a Boolean parameter. Okay. Now, since the file writer throws an I/O exception, and the I/O exception, if you look at the exceptions, okay, found not found exception is underneath I/O exception, so we can just say we can specify I/O exception. Later on, we'll learn about inheritance, and it's going to make more sense what we need to do or why we're doing this. So now that we know all the absolute path, what you can do is you can simplify your code by importing all the paths to the different classes, and that simplifies your code, and you don't have to write Java I/O every time. So your class looks a little bit more optimized. So now what can we do? What can we do with these objects? Now, if we have an input file, we have a method, and make sure you go to the API, read about this method, okay? So that way you can see that what does the exist method do, okay? And then make sure that you're copying and pasting some of the descriptions just to keep it straight and make sure you understand what is it that you're doing, okay? So we are displaying the error message because the file does not exist, okay? In this case, we are using input, but input, there's no reason to create a, let's say, print writer or file writer or the scanner object when the file does not exist. So we want to make sure that we bring that up front, and then we do the same thing for the output file as well. So we're handling those two if statements. So the input and the output files are not strings, those are file objects. So how do we get the string out of those file objects? Okay, so we can actually get the name for the files, and if you look at the API, you can see that the get name will return a string, and that's exactly what we want for the error messages. And then we're just using the system exit to exit or end the Java virtual machine session with a specific code. Okay, so let's just get rid of the file writer for now, and let's just work with the print writer. So we are ready. So we have two files open, the input and the output file. Now we are ready to read the input file. The input file read is the scanner class. So in this scanner class, and the print writer class, you can see that we can close both of those objects. So we can put that in before we do anything else, and then we actually do the work where we're going to read from the input and write to the output. So while what? While the input, so we're going to have to look at the input file, and the input file we're going to see if we have the next. Now the next, the has next will give us a Boolean value back, and the Boolean value will let us know if we have the next line. Okay, so we're using that directly. So the output file, what can we do with the output file? Well, we can use it just like we use the system.out object, which was print, println, printf, but now we're using that with the output file. Okay, now what are we going to output? Well, we're going to output what we read. So every time we read a new line, instead of saving that new line, we directly sending it to the output file, and that's all we do. When everything completes, then it's gonna be done with the file copying. So one line at a time, copy one line at a time until you reach the end of the file, and at that point you're done. So we have a.text as an input. We run the application. Okay. Make sure that you do the double backslashes to escape the meaning of the slash. So we are running it, make some spelling mistakes, okay, fix those. Okay, so at that point, because we hard-coded the path to the source and destination, that means you can just run the application. It makes a copy, and you can see if the source does not exist, it gives us an error message. Okay, rename it back to a.text, run it again, there is the destination. A exists, and then we go to destination. Okay, and if we run it the second time, it sees that b.text exists already. It does not let us overwrite it. Okay, so what happens if we're gonna do the append, which is the file writer? You can see there is no, I commented out, but really there's no reason to check if the output file exists, because if the output file exists, then you just keep overwriting, keep appending to the output file. So you can see that b.text has multiple times what was in the source file. But hard-coding the string for input or from and to file is just too rigid. So we can use the args. With args0 and args1, make sure that you put the full path in double quotations, and the backslashes, escape the backslashes, and comma delimit the list, and you have the A and B, and for the source and destination. And if you want to run this on the command line, there's my copy is the application, so you can just say Java my copy space, and then you can put the full path to the source and destination, and the copy exists. Copy worked, right? Now k.text is the source file. It doesn't exist, so we get an error message. Okay, and destination already exists, so that's an error message. And if you look at the error level, when the input doesn't exist, then we have 2017, and if the output already exists, we get the error 2018, and if everything works, then we get the error level of 0. Okay, so now we can go to the next level, and we can look at it. What happens if I just take the simple application and I want to change this to a function? So now from the main method, you're just calling this function with argument 0 and argument 1 that will receive it as string from and string to. Now the function will throw an exception that's going to be received by main, so then main has to throw it back to the Java virtual machine. Okay, so now all these changes, before you make all these changes, you make sure that you reflect these changes in your design. So now we have another function. So whatever we used to do in the main, now we're doing that in the function itself. We don't need to redraw anything. We need to do some minor changes. And the only thing we're gonna have in main now is just to call the function, and that's all we do. So main doesn't do anything else, just calls the function. At that point, the function structured logic will come alive, and it will make the necessary changes, or copy commands, I guess, necessary procedures, if you want to call it that way. Okay, so it works perfectly fine, right? It takes a couple of seconds to make changes to your design. Okay, and so if you want to take this to the next level, then maybe we want to create an object-oriented copy command. So now I created another UML for the copy object, the copy class itself. So the copy object will have attributes, the from and the to file attributes is going to have a constructor and the actual copy command that will perform the copy. Okay, make sure that the attributes are hidden, they're private. Okay, so now what do? We just take what the function was doing in our application. Now we're connecting that to the actual copy method within the class. And what the constructor does, the constructor just sets the from and to file names based on the two strings that we're going to send. So the constructor doesn't really do much. It just creates the string. Now you can, of course, do all this without the method. So we don't have to have the method. We can do all this copying of the actual files right there in the constructor. So now in the main method, the added complexity here is that we're going to have to create an object of copy, and after we create an object of copy, then we call the copy method on that object to actually perform the copy operation. But that's all. So using the software, it makes your job much easier. Okay, so we don't need the copy method anymore, and make sure you have those dotted lines to show that my copy application is using the copy object. Okay, so with all methods, make sure that you have your description, your parameters, and return value if you have any. Make sure that you focus on docstrings and have proper documentation. Okay, But you can see in this case it's just a method. So that method can be basically cut out of this application, and we can use that in our class. So make sure that you switch over from source code to documentation. Make sure that you see your description, your parameters, what you're going to throw, what is the return value. Okay, so in this case main still doesn't have a proper documentation, so you can put in the documentation, switch over, and now you have proper documentation for main, the main method. Okay, but now we're also going to throw a exception. So now you're going to have to give some description. Why are you throwing that? Well, the reason we're throwing that is because we're creating the scanner object, right? And if we create a file writer, we're also going to throw something. Okay, so now in the copy object, we also do the proper documentation. We get rid of all the code that BlueJ provided, and we create our attributes, the two private attributes, the from and the to, and then we create the constructor. Remember what the constructor does is, well, it's right there in the design, so we can write all this very fast, because at this point you should not have any kind of a confusion how to implement this application. Do the documentation, the proper documentation, and just paste in the method that you used to have in your application. We're doing the same thing, nothing will change. Okay, we need to also copy the import statements. Okay, so I just got rid of the throws statement, so you can see that we're still gonna throw that because it's coming out of the object. But if you ever make this kind of a mistake, make sure that anything is thrown at a object or a method, the method also has to throw it further, all the way to the Java virtual machine. Okay? So as soon as we tell main, whatever comes out of the object as a exception needs to be thrown further away, then you can compile it, and now you run it just like you ran before. We can have a wrong source, already existing destination, and everything runs exactly the same way. So a simple application, an object-oriented application, would give you exactly the same results. So hopefully you enjoyed this and you learned something from this application, and make sure that you do this as I showed you, that understand what you're doing, go to the API, read the constructors, read the methods, read all the objects, make notes as you're doing it. You can start with a simple application, but after that you need to convert the simple application to an object-oriented application, and that only takes a few minutes if the application works. And later on you'll learn, and you're going to be more and more comfortable creating object-oriented applications right from the beginning. But hopefully you can see, or you did see, that the design is very important before you start even thinking about implementation and actual coding. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.